Mountains have always been seen as sources of inspiration and creativity. I would probably agree with that. A sense of space certainly frees up your thinking. And though my sources of inspiration tend to be a lot more specific, many of them came from the local environment. Many years ago, I was digging right here in this garden, and a currawong came and perched on one of the branches overhead. He was quite a young currawong, and he seemed hungry, and I happened to dig up a worm, so I gave it to him and he ate it. And then he hung around for more, so I found another worm and I gave him that and he ate it. But then I ran out of worms, so I found a slug and I gave it to him, and he didn't seem to like that. He was wiping his beak and kind of clattering his beak, and I felt really guilty. But it gave me the idea for a story. And it was because of that little currawong that I first wrote this book, Daryl's Dinner. In this book, a little baby magpie doesn't know what to eat. So first of all, it eats a cigarette butt, and then it eats a slug and ends up the way my currawong did, and then eventually it eats a turd, a dog turd, and finally finds something that it ought to eat. Kids like hearing about animals that eat turds. I use magpies because they're more expressive than currawongs and generally prettier and a bit smarter. Sorry, currawongs. When I wrote this book, Shepherd, about a young convict called Tom who's on the run from a really horrible, murderous fellow convict, I set most of it in the bush. So I drew most of my inspiration from the bush that I walk in all the time. For instance, there's one paragraph here that says, "I'm considering my options when a faint nagging sound intrudes on my thoughts, the sound of a thornbeak crying its alarm. I didn't notice it at first. The bird isn't anywhere near me. Its shrill piping is coming from across the meadow, way over there, and whatever's troubling it isn't moving." The thornbeak that I'm talking about here is actually a spinebill, and I'm bothered by spinebills in the garden all the time. They're always shrieking their concern and anxiety. In another part of this book, someone is given away by a bunch of ants. So it actually says, "They're small black ants hurrying along in single file, and each is carrying a tiny white bundle. A breadcrumb, a grain of sugar. There was sugar in Woodbine's saddlebags. Carver must have taken it. He must have taken the bread too. He can't be far away." See, if you watch ants, they can tell you a lot. It's not that I find all my inspiration in the bush. I mean, I wrote this book because I worked in a bank for a few years, and I wrote this book because my daughter used to have sleep issues when she was a baby, and I wrote this book because of a lovely dog that my friend owned, a dog called Barney, who used to eat everything. And I wrote this book because my daughter used to have pet mice when she was little. Basically, you can find your inspiration anyway. I actually find a lot of inspiration in faces, in pictures of faces and sculptures of faces. I just love looking at faces. this beautiful face is 2 stories high. If you're ever looking for inspiration, visit the street art walk in Katoomba. There are hundreds of stories here. I also get a lot of my inspiration from other people, friends and family. For instance, I wrote this book about a ghost that writes on a girl's wall because I heard a story from my friend Ursula Dubasarski, who has recently been the Children's Laureate of Australia and who's written heaps of books. I mean, The Red Shoes, The Two Gorillas, there's a whole bunch of wonderful books she's written, including this one, The March of the Ants. And she once gave me this book. It's Visibility, the Poetry Game. She gave me that as a present. But yeah, she told me a story once about some graffiti on her walls, and I sort of used it for a book of mine. This beautiful jar was given to me and my husband as a wedding present by John Ward and his wife Gail. John was my history lecturer at university. He was hugely inspirational. If it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't have written so many of the books that I have written. The inscription on this jar says, "Have pity on me" in Italian, which I suppose is good enough advice for a newlywed. John published many books. This one I've used a lot, as you can see. It's a translation of a medieval document. John was a medieval Latinist. This one, Worshipping Women, is a collection of essays that he edited, and I've used that a lot too, but not as much as the other one. And this is a collection of essays published in his honour, which shows you how loved and respected he was. All these books are set in medieval Europe, and all of them were written because I had John Ward as my history teacher. But of all the people in my life, the greatest inspiration to me as a writer was probably my mother, because she got me interested in books. She used to read to me and my brothers every dinner time from books like these ones, all about Greek and Roman legends. She was a writer herself all her life, though she never had anything published. You can see her editing and corrections on all her papers. She really worked away at it. Another big source of inspiration for me is cinema and television. As you can see, my husband is also a big consumer. And whenever I see a really good film, especially a magical children's film, I get so inspired. I can feel the inspiration and the creativity surging up inside me. Luckily, we have several cinemas up here in the mountains, and one of them is a real gem. It's in a village up the road called Mount Victoria, which is small and cute and very historical. With the smallest bandstand you've ever seen and an old public hall that's been transformed into Mount Vic Flicks. Mount Vic Flicks has such a cosy, homely, vintage vibe. The seats are a little old, but if you find them uncomfortable, there are always cushions you can borrow to sit on. The snack bar is actually inside the auditorium and offers a very unusual menu, including hot soup, homemade slices, and tea served in lovely mismatched china. This visit, the slice of the day is sultana and coconut, but I've decided to get a chamomile tea and a dark chocolate and pumpkin seed biscuit, served on a beautiful little plate. And here I am waiting to be inspired. We all deserve a bit of inspiration.